Morning all. Thanks for coming. Just to start off, this is my first Policy and Resources meeting. As the new chair of the Fire Authority, I automatically become the chair of this committee, so I've switched over from ACOG. And Dan is remaining vice chair of this committee, which is great. So be gentle with me, it's my first time. We have apologies for absence from Councillors Hardy and Ralston, but we have nothing else received.
And we're missing Councillor May at the moment, but he may join us.
Thank you. I'm just going to pass over to Paula now.
Thank you, Chair. There are no fire alarms due to be tested today, but if the alarm does go off, please make your way to the nearest exit, and the rendezvous point is by the entrance to the overflow car park. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There were no declarations of interest declared before the meeting. Are there any that need to be declared here? No? Brilliant. We didn't receive any public access statements, so I can move on to Chair's business. This meeting is taking place at Severn Park, and we are recording the meeting for the public to view on the Fire Authority YouTube channel. I'm going to ask members to introduce themselves first. I am Councillor Paul Goggin from Bristol City Council, and I will go to my left.
Robin Moss from Bath and North East Somerset Council.
Chris Murphy from South Gloucestershire Council.
Cam Hayward, Bristol Council.
Daniel Thomas, North Somerset Council.
Councillor Tom Menard, Bristol City Council.
Good morning, Robert Payne, Councillor for Western-super-Mare Central, North Somerset Council.
Richard Eddy, Bristol.
Fabulous, thanks everyone. And I'd now like to ask officers to introduce themselves, and again I'll start on my left.
Good morning, Amanda Brown, Clerk to Avon Fire Authority.
Good morning, I'm Verity Lee, Statutory Finance Officer.
Good morning, Claire Bentley, Head of Finance.
Good morning, Emma Bowen, Democratic Services.
Good morning, Steve Quinton, responsible for prevention and protection.
Morning, Tanya Nathan, Head of Procurement.
Good morning, Catherine Withers, was formerly Head of Control and Communications.
Good morning, I'm Ian Potter, I'm the Continuous Improvement Manager.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Osborne, Efficiency and Savings Programme.
Good morning, Amber Foreman, Director of Corporate Services.
Good morning, Paula Lyons, Temporary Assistant Chief Fire Officer of Portfolio.
Thanks all, and I'll just pass to the clerk for an announcement.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just to advise this committee that as you discharge the authority's responsibilities as scheme manager for the firefighters' pension schemes, I just want you to note that at the last Fire Authority meeting, a paper was approved by all members to appoint a new independent chair of the local pension board. That's Mr. Philip Duggett, who will be in the LPB chair from July 2025 and is attending an induction at headquarters shortly. So just to let you know that that matter is now concluded.
Thanks, Amanda. So if I can just remind everyone to use their microphones when speaking so that it's clear on the recording, and then remember to turn them off when you've finished. Voting today will take place by a show of hands. We'll start with any votes against, then any abstentions, and then votes for. So moving on to agenda item 6. Now, these are the minutes and the confidential minutes also of the PRC held on the 30th of January. Now, I don't want to move this because I wasn't there, so if I could ask Dan to propose.
Happy to, Chair.
And do we have a seconder? And are there any additions or deletions or corrections to be applied? Brilliant. Okay, I'll sign them and pass them on to the chair, to the clerk, sorry. Agenda item 7 is continuous improvement, and I'm going to pass over to Ian for this.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. So I'm here today to give you the next progress update on HMI action plans and the transformation programme. It's the 5th combined report of those improvement activities, but it is going to be the last one for transformation, as the programme came to an end at the end of March. So if I could direct you to 5.5, which is where we start looking at the dashboards and how we're doing. So as previously reported to this committee, all 25 actions in the risk information or the SSRI accelerated calls of concern have been completed. There is one action that is part of that cause of concern where work is ongoing, but it does not relate to SSRIs. It relates to individual risks on domestic dwellings, and I will touch on that in a bit. So I've lost my place. So moving on to prevention, again, all of the actions here have been completed. You'll see that 18 of those have been set to complete, so there's sufficient evidence that they have been delivered. So some of these things are sort of quite binary. So one of the actions was around recruiting to a role. That's been done, the person's in place, and their work is well underway now. There are still others that are pending assurance, and we're currently working with the leads around those ahead of the revisit in July, which I'll come on to as well. We're now using closeout reports to the Internal Improvement Board. So where an area for improvement or a cause of concern actions have all been completed, the lead is now completing a closeout report where they will demonstrate how that has been delivered with the evidence alongside it, so that members of the board can take a view on whether they think it's sufficient or whether there's more work to do. It's quite early on in terms of us trialling that process. We used it in transformation and it was quite successful. Ahead of those closeout reports, though, coming forward, we are meeting with the leads just to make sure that they're ready to take it forward to a closeout report, so that what goes to Improvement Board generally will be ready for that level of assurance. In terms of our values and culture, again, you can see most of the actions are complete. I think what I'd say with culture is culture change does take quite a long time to come into effect. So there will be a lag between some of those actions being implemented and the impact of those things being felt. There's only 3 actions left, and I've set out in the report what they cover, and you'll notice that they're all due to be completed by the end of June, so fairly close in terms of the actual completion. So taking all of the causes of concern together, almost all of the actions are now complete. Moving on to areas for improvement, we had 31 of these, as you'll recall, 110 actions across all of those, and about 60% of those have been completed. 37 of those are being worked on currently, and we have 6 that are off track, and those are set out in the appendix to this report. You'll also see in that appendix that all of the leads have provided a comment against those actions as to where they are and when they expect them to be completed. All of the completed actions should have sufficient evidence uploaded in order to demonstrate that the action has been completed, but also what we're looking for is evidence that it's actually impacted. So we just need to make sure we're not focusing on just doing an action. It needs to be that action has led to some sort of improvement. And that's part of the role of the Internal Improvement Board is to kind of to test that through. Out of the 31 areas for improvement, we've identified 8 of them that we think all of the actions have been completed. And as I mentioned, we've been having meetings with some of those owners about bringing forward a closeout report to the Internal Improvement Board, and we've got a couple of those coming to the meeting later this month. So that's all I was going to say about progress against the actions and the dashboards. Before I move on, are there any questions about any of that you want to raise immediately, or shall I just carry on?
Thanks, Ian. And it does look as though we're making good progress, largely with obviously the few exceptions. But I'll open up for questions from my colleagues. No. I also noticed that the 6 ones that are off track are all due to be finished by the 30th of June. So that's looking quite good as well. Okay, well, we were asked to scrutinise. Sorry, Ian,
sorry,
please.
I just wanted to pause at that point just to cover those elements. Thank you. So we have a further revisit taking place by HMI in early July. So this is the 4th revisit. They are going to be focusing on 2 of the 3 outstanding causes of concern. So they're looking at the risk information, which is the SSRIs, and also prevention. They've said that they are going to leave the culture cause of concern until the full inspection later in the year. But of course, culture is everywhere, so they will be observing it during their visit time, so we need to be mindful of that, but they're not specifically looking at that cause of concern. So they're going to be with us for approximately a week. They're going to be meeting with the key leads as they have done previously. There are 2 focus groups. One of those is with our community safety workers, and another is with crew and watch managers. There's also 2 desktop reviews, so this is where they look at some of the individual records and they go through them to see how we've gone about doing those. So that'll be the SSRIs and home fire safety visits. They're also going to carry out some station visits to do what they call reality testing. So this is meeting with the people on the front line, talking about those SSRIs and home fire safety visits, the training they've received, the quality assurance process we've got in place, that kind of thing. And then there'll be a final meeting with the chief at the end of that week, and then there'll be a debrief of that probably a couple of weeks after that has taken place. So it's relatively short in terms of the visit. You may recall from my previous report that a number of the recommendations against those causes of concern they're coming back to look at have already been closed. So this is to really look at the balance of those that are outstanding. And I'm in regular contact with our service liaison lead at the HMI. We already started planning all of that through collecting the documents that they've asked for that revisit. So that's all kind of in good shape, and we should be able to finalise the timetable quite soon. Moving on then to the Spotlight report, there is just the one action left for this one. This hasn't changed from my previous report. The recommendation is set out at bullet 5.18. This is around fire standards, and the recommendation was to have a plan in place by the 1st of June 2023 around the implementation of those fire standards. Although that's quite a long time in the past now, we've taken a view that we're going to leave this action open on the basis that simply having a plan doesn't really mean anything in terms of any meaningful change. So we have plans in place. We've done a first phase. We've been working to identify gaps against the standard. We've also had a workshop with the NFCC coming in to help facilitate that around our areas for improvement and some of those fire standards and how they interact, and a different approach to how we manage that. The second phase is really looking at the lines of assurance. So there's a kind of a standard around having three lines of assurance. So one of those is going to be something we do as a first line of evidence, if you like. The second would be some kind of internal scrutiny, and then the third line of assurance is external scrutiny. So we're looking at building that into this. But what that does is it takes the evidence and it puts it into those different lines of assurance. So that's where we are with that, and we intend to keep that open until we're satisfied that we've gone far enough with the implementation, rather than just relying on ticking a box to say that we've got a plan. There's also a misconduct thematic report, as you'll recall. The dashboard there shows that we've completed 10 of the actions. 7 are on track. There are none that are off track or at risk. And I've set out there the actions that have been set to complete pending assurance since our last report. So you can see quite a lot of progress made since the last update. So that covers off those additional inspection reports. There is now a new way of us sharing information and updates with HMI. So they've given us access to their SharePoint, and we now can upload to that portal evidence of where we've completed actions, and also provide updates. So this is a way of, rather than sending something just between ourselves and HMI, we can actually see what we're doing, but we can also see what every other service in the country is doing as well. So it lists all of our causes of concern recommendations, all of those from the thematic and spotlight reports, the status of each thing. So there's quite a lot of information, but it also gives us an opportunity to see kind of in real time what some of those other services are doing. It's quite new. It's only been in for a number of weeks. But one of the things we will be doing is looking to see what those other services are doing ahead of their report being published. So we already look at the published reports, and we look at where services are good and outstanding and how we might use some of that. But this enables us to look at some of the things that are currently going on that are not yet published. And we need to provide those updates every 3 months. So the intention is to tie it in with this reporting cycle so that all of the people that provide those updates aren't providing it multiple times. We can use it for multiple purposes. Lots of really good progress for our current round 3 inspection, but the next one is just around the corner. So the Fire and Rescue Service Inspection Programme 2025-27 gets underway in June. We are sort of reasonably early in the process. I think we were 9th or 10th on the list last time around. So we're anticipating our inspection period beginning sometime in the autumn. Hopefully we'll find out next month something a little bit more solid than that. There are some changes to the programme which we're also looking at. About 90% of it will remain the same, but there's a few new things in there around things like leadership and how well we're working with communities in terms of resilience. And they're also just working on updating the characteristics of good, which is what they use in their inspection programme as well. But again, my understanding is that much of that will be the same as last time. In terms of preparations underway, obviously we need to make sure we've got the revisit covered off, but we also need to be thinking ahead in terms of that inspection. We know, I guess the overall process, it runs over about 10 weeks. So there'll be some document and data requests early on. Then there's a survey of all staff. And then they'll spend about 3 weeks on site with us, and then some various meetings outside of that as well. So some preparations that we've undertaken so far. In terms of our comms, we've got a communication strategy, not just for HMI, actually it's broader than that. It covers improvement and how we're going to go about doing that. I've also had a meeting with our head of corporate comms to talk about how we go about engaging with people across the service, way ahead of the inspection, but particularly around the staff survey. So HMI have identified nationally this is an issue that take-up rates or engagement rates are quite low. So they've been doing some work to try and improve that, and then we're looking at how we can have a better engagement rate than last time, so that HMI get a more representative picture of the service before they come in, because they use that survey data, as part of their kind of preparations for that. So we're going to look at how we can improve take-up there. We're also looking at a deep dive into the narrative in our previous inspection report, along with all the things that we're learning from other service reports that are getting published. Doing quite a lot around assurance. I've mentioned the internal improvement board, the meetings we're having with leads. I've said in the report, booked drop-in sessions. The reality is that it actually makes more sense to have specific meetings rather than just a general space. But my diary's open to everybody, and people are free to come and talk to me about any advice they may need. I've also agreed with our service liaison lead HMI for some informal face-to-face engagement work. This is about building our relationship with the SLL, but also it's an opportunity for them to come in an informal way outside of the inspection regime, just to have a chat, see how we're doing, and I guess it's unusual because most of the contact we have is quite formal, so I think that will be quite welcome. And we fortunately we still have our previous SLO in the service, so I'm working and talking with him about his experiences of the previous inspection. So we're working on that. So I think we've got that quite well covered. Again, I'm just going to pause there because that's HMI. So before I go on to transformation, is there anything that anyone would like to ask about HMI?
Thank you. And I do like the sound of that SharePoint. Obviously, there's no point reinventing the wheel every time. And if we can share knowledge between services, that's going to be great. And I'm also looking forward to being involved in this round of inspections for the first time. Dan.
Thanks, Chair. Ian, thank you for the report, as ever. Just a quick question on the completed pending assurance phase. Have we had any actions completed and failed that internal assurance phase yet and had to be reopened, or not so far? That's
we've got somewhere we've asked for more evidence, particularly data. I think one of the areas that I think we can improve further on is data collection. So not just evidence of the action having been completed, but some of that evidence. So because we're having the pre-meetings ahead of the closeout report, which is where we will sign off the pending assurance part, we're having those discussions at that point. So nothing's failed in that sense. We did have a couple of closeout reports go to the last IIB, and it was the first time we'd done that, and there were some learning points. So nothing's failed. And what we're trying to do, obviously, is to make sure that when things do get to IIB, that the likelihood of them failing is very low.
Thank you. Perhaps failed was the wrong word, but thank you very much.
No, I mean, it's not. No, I think it's failing that assurance test. Are we satisfied that it's resolved whatever issue was raised? And I think part of that is evaluation. So sometimes there's a time lag between the action being taken and the evaluation. And what we'll find with quite a few of these actions is that we'll take a view now, but we're still looking for those leads to do future evaluation and build that into the kind of the business as usual process. So there's that continuous improvement going forward. So it's not just doing the work, finish, we move on to something else. So we've done that bit. What's the next stage in terms of that improvement journey?
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Good question. Tom?
Again, thank you for your report. I mean, it's just an observation which really kind of follows on from that, 'cause we talked a bit about culture through the course of your report, and although the actions will close, of course, culture is never something that you stop doing or close out. It's got its constant journey of improvement, constantly needing to work at. So I guess I'm just interested in how you will ensure that improvement around culture will continue beyond the lifetime of the programme.
Yeah, so I mean, quite a lot to talk about there. In terms of culture, we're currently looking at building a longer-term strategy. So we've obviously got actions in here that deals with the things that were surfaced by HMI. But culture change does take a long time. That's been acknowledged by HMI in some of their reports. So we're looking at a longer-term strategy and what we need to do, perhaps over a 5 or even 10-year horizon. But I think there's some. We've made some good headway. We have regular station visits by the Service Leadership Board and our DICE team, and we get a lot of feedback from that. And we're just about to implement a new digital capture form, so that we can make sure we are capturing all of those things. They can be collated, and then we can look for themes. And deal with those and have that feedback loop back to the stations and corporate teams with whatever changes we need. We've just recently launched some capability with a Firewatch system for people to update their protected characteristics, so we get a better understanding of the diversity of our workforce, both in terms of looking at that compared with our communities, but also understanding what some of the needs of our people are in terms of those characteristics. So we're developing a people dashboard with a whole load of metrics. So there's an awful lot of things that are going on around culture, both in terms of determining what some of those issues still are, but also resolving or putting things in place to resolve some of the things that we already know.
Thanks, Tom. Another good question, and this all makes my job a lot easier if there's good questions from members. Ian, I don't think there's any other questions on this part. Would you like to carry on?
So moving on to transformation then. So the programme officially came to an end at the end of March. There are a small number of work packages that weren't completed by that date, and I've set those out in the report here. So I've said which ones they are, why they weren't completed, and where they're going to go beyond the programme. So none of the outstanding work packages have been dropped. They will happen at some point. So I've set that out there. So I don't intend to go through those point by point. It's just really to reassure members that the vast majority of the programme has been completed, and what is left has a home as business as usual somewhere across the service. We've had a programme close down meeting, so we got pretty much the whole team back together and spent a day, which was really lovely to get everybody back and to celebrate all of those achievements from the programme. We gathered a whole load of sort of ideas, information, knowledge, and that will all go into a formal closed down report, which will be presented back to the leadership team and at some point back to members as well. And that will cover those things I've listed there. So we looked at our goals and objectives of the programme in the first place, what we thought the benefits would be, what have been realised, any unanticipated benefits along the way, things that we've learned that might be useful for future programmes, the outstanding items that I've already mentioned, and then I'll do a financial summary as well. And then there's some practical things to close down around the programme itself. But so essentially that's come to an end. I've not put it in the report, but I'm very pleased to be able to say that everybody that was part of that programme is remaining in service in another role, which I think is fantastic. And I'd also just kind of like to say my thank you to everybody, both in the transformation team and all across the service who participated in this and contributed to the achievements of it. And that's the end of the report that I wanted to present to you today.
Thank you, Ian. And I think as all members will want to echo your thanks to the team for the work that they've done over the period. The close down report sounds very interesting. Do you know when we're roughly likely to see that?
I wasn't sure if it would come to this meeting or to the Fire Authority, because it was a Fire Authority authorised programme. If it's to PRC, I'd hope that will be at the next meeting.
Fabulous, thanks very much. Questions? Robert?
Yeah, can I just ask what is WP33, taking time to talk? I don't understand what that is.
Yeah, sorry. Yes. So taking time to talk, this is... originally, it was a work package looking at improving our PDR process, but we then looked at it more broadly. So this is essentially all of the conversations between managers and their line reports. So it might be around return to work, welfare, development, promotion, any kind of interaction, and trying to bring that together in a more holistic approach. With a toolkit that would sit alongside it. So it's an important culture piece, which is why I've said there that it will be sort of fed into that longer term culture piece. But it's really about maximising the value of those interactions and what that then delivers in terms of staff well-being, motivation, productivity, etc.
Thank you, Ian. Any other questions? No? Okay. Please.
Thank you. It's just really to give members some further assurance. You may hear some change in terminology from what was transformation, service improvement to now portfolio. And it's just to update you on the business case that was put through in December, that we now have secured a portfolio for 1 more year, and this is going to be a dedicated directorate for continuous improvement and transformation, and work is ongoing as to what that looks like in next steps. But to really just to give you that assurance, we are absolutely committed to this journey. We know there is work to do, but we're very much focused on this, and we'll keep you updated on that progress.
Thank you, Paula. Any questions arising from that? Okay. Well, that report was for scrutiny, and I think we've done that. So we can move on to agenda item 8, which is 2024-25 revenue budget monitoring report as at 28th of February 2025. And this is Verity to present on this one.
Thank you. Yes. So my paper starts on page 31. Of your packs. This is a regular update that we bring to this committee. So this is the final regular update we will bring for the 24-25 financial year. So it gives you an update on the actual spend for the first 11 months of the year, and then a projected outturn based on those first 11 months. There's just a projection for the last month to take us to what we expect the full year outturn to be. There's one appendix to this paper on page 35, and that gives you the detailed breakdown of our income and expenditure account and the variances against budget, both for the 11 months actual and then the final year outturn that's expected at this point in time. This paper is for scrutiny, so the recommendation is to review the information that's presented to you here today. I will move on to section 5 of my paper, which starts on page 32, and just pick out some of the key variances and the key items of income and expenditure that are within my report. So the top of page 32, there's a section on income. We have got income from central government, and that is made up of two parts. One part, which is the funding, is expected to be as budgeted, but there is expected to be an under-recovery on the grants forecast. So the grants forecast includes our business rates reconciliation, a payment that we expect to receive each year, but we haven't had any information on that payment at this point in time. So what we've done is reduce that income expectation for the full year, just to make sure that we've got something prudent in there. We don't want to estimate what we might receive. That rates reconciliation payment can vary quite significantly year on year. So we've had payments in the region of 800,000, but also down nearer 200,000. So we've brought it down to a lower value for that one. So there's a variance on that income line. Paragraph 5.2 talks about over-recovery on the income from investments and also on other grants and income. That's a similar position to what has been presented to this committee in previous reports. We have had higher than expected returns on our cash balances. We expected interest rates to drop, but they are dropping, but just not quite as quickly. So we're still generating more investment income than originally expected. And the other grants and income line is made up of quite a few smaller income sources, and they are quite unpredictable. So we put a nominal figure in there in terms of the budget, but we are expected to over-recover slightly on that line as well. Moving on to the expenditure side of the revenue account, we've got employee costs, are the most significant cost for the service. There are some variances in there that I'll pick out. So a large variance on whole-time firefighter pay costs, which is described in paragraph 5.4. There is quite a significant underspend here. We have previously reported underspends on this line, and it grows as the year has progressed, and it's to do with the way that the budget's been set. So the budget's been set based on all established positions being filled throughout the year. We have vacancies in our whole-time establishment, which means that we draw on overtime to bridge those gaps, but the overtime doesn't necessarily offset the cost of or the saving that we make in the vacant position. So that's where the underspend is generated on that line. Paragraph 5.5 and 5.6 are very similar to positions that I've presented previously. So there's been no significant change in terms of the expected outturn for both control and on-call firefighters, so I won't touch on those in any detail. Paragraph 5.7 at the top of page 33 talks about corporate staff costs. We've previously reported an overspend on corporate staff costs, but what we've done now, we had at the bottom of our income and expenditure account, we had put aside £440,000 for additional costs we expected to incur in relation to delivering against our HMICFRS action plan. A lot of those costs have been in relation to staff costs. So what we've done now is reallocated those staff costs down against that line. So it brings a corporate staff cost more in line with budget and means that we've utilised that HMIC specific pot of money there as well. Moving on to premises and transport costs, so we've looked at the combination of these two together. So overall, across the two, we've got a 50k overspend. And there's a few larger moving parts within that. So we've got an overspend on rents of rates of just under £200,000. That's mainly due to the rates, and I think really it was an issue with the way the budget was set. At the time the budget was set, we weren't certain what the rates were going to be, and they came in a lot higher than expected. But that has been corrected for the future budget, so for 25-26 we shouldn't see such a variance going forwards. There's also been a bit of an overspend, around £100,000 on property repairs. Just because of additional maintenance costs that we're required, we've had to incur to maintain the condition of some of our properties. It's been partially offset then by an underspend that we've seen on the vehicle maintenance, fuels, tyres and testing in category, and that's mainly around the improvements and the process reviews that have been taking place with the fleet management team, so in line with the new fleet strategy, the fleet replacement strategy as well. Supplies and services at paragraph 5.10, we have had a fairly significant underspend here, or an expected fairly significant underspend for the full year. A large chunk of that is the receipt of a £500,000 credit in relation to airwave costs. So it's costs that we've incurred in the last 2 years in relation to our radios, but we have now received a credit note. We've been informed of a credit note we will receive in April relating to 2 prior years. So that will be reducing our costs. So you can see quite a significant variance on the communications and IT line. That's as a result of that airwave credit. There are some other variances in there as a result of lower spend on things like equipment, subscriptions, uniforms. A lot of those spends are not expected to be permanent underspends. It's just to do with timing. So we are expected to spend, and that we're expecting kind of additional cost pressures in relation to PP refreshes and things like that in future. The final category is the other cost section. So it's right at the bottom of the income and expenditure account in your appendix. This looks like we've got around £1.5 million overspend. But what we have got really is it's the variance on the transfers to and from reserves line. So we forecast to be able to utilise some of our reserves for things like our protection team in terms of the protection uplift grant funding we receive. Some of the transformation costs were coming through from reserves. So we will still do that, but actually because of the underspends we've seen in other categories in the income and expenditure account above, we are able to, as well as utilise some of those reserves, we're able to top up reserves with our underspend. So we were able to balance the budget by topping up our reserves, which is a good news story for this financial year. A full reserve strategy is presented to the Fire Authority at the AGM. So in June, July time later on this year, the full Fire Authority will get a full picture of what that reserve position looks like at the end of March and what those reserves are being put aside for. Reserves generally are for more one-off projects or initiatives. They're not necessarily to fund ongoing spend in the service. So we will look to what our current cost pressures are expected to be and to top up the reserves to help us bridge gaps in the future, but it won't be for any ongoing spend. They'll be for one-off projects. And a good example of one that we might look to utilise it for is a mobilising contract where we're expecting costs to be quite high and there'll be significant implementation costs. So we wouldn't necessarily use the reserves to fund ongoing recurring costs there, but for implementation costs that are one-off and for that first period of that contract, we might well be able to use some of these underspends this year to help mitigate some of those higher costs in future. So it's a good news story from the revenue budget perspective. And I'll pause there then for any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions? Richard.
Looking at staffing costs, I see that the control room overspend was partly offset by the recruitment of 2 staff members. Were these filling vacant posts or were they the creation of new posts?
I believe filling vacant posts, but I'm just looking around to check if anyone knows any different to me. Yeah, they believe filling vacant posts. So I think the overspend came because of it being quite a small team, having to draw on overtime quite significantly while they were vacant. So once they've been populated, once those positions are now filled, that utilisation of overtime is reduced.
Thank you, Verity. Robin.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. First of all, just some more detail on the income from central government, the rates return, business rate return. I mean, I know that at times we think that HM Treasury just draw numbers out of a hat, but I'm curious why don't we know within a reasonable amount what that return will be? Isn't it a set formula?
It's not an easy one to try and explain. So what happens is, obviously we know what we're going to get in terms of the actual NNDR in year, but the reconciliation is actually based on an audited version of the same returns from all of our 4 unitary authorities, which gets sent into the Home Office. They then take their top slice of that and then we get allocated another proportion. So it's all around whether or not they've collected more than they're expecting to. So it is very it's not easy to predict, and the information doesn't come to us until that reconciliation has taken place. So for us to try and predict it is actually really challenging. And because we've got 4 unitary authorities, obviously each one will have a slightly different so we can't even sort of base it on what's happened previously very easily. So it is unfortunately just the way it works. Usually we would have received it before, but they've also now changed the forms several times in the last 18 to 24 months, so I think it's just becoming more complicated rather than less.
Variation is collection rates within the local
Yeah, that's what it
authorities
tells
rather
me, and
than
anything else
the
that's
set
happened
formula.
in year.
Okay.
Yeah.
The second bit was looking at investment income and the additional collection of 181,000 due to higher interest rates. And I kind of looked down at the bottom line, which is on our capital financing. I suppose the first question is why are higher interest rates, or predicted higher interest rates being better than predicted, not been reflected negatively in our capital financing costs as well as our return costs? And if that is because we're on fixed interest rates, are we therefore going to lose out in the next year as interest rates are predicted to come down in our investment income, but not gain any benefit in our capital financing?
It is absolutely because we're on fixed interest rates. We've got two existing loans at the moment with the Public Works Loan Board. They're both on slightly different interest rates, but they're around 3%. But they're fixed for the term of those loans, and one is fixed until 2030, and I think the other one's until 2040. So quite a long time, and we are expecting rates to drop. But actually, the interest that we're receiving at the moment on investment income, I think, is nearer the 4% mark and dropping. So the investment income we receive is Bristol City Council looking after our bank accounts, so they invest it along with all of their money. So we do get a relatively good rate of return on that. I think if it was just our bank account and the interest rate we received on that, not having done anything with it, we wouldn't be receiving such significant returns. But they pull the accounts together and they do lots of overnight investments and things like that to get the best return they can for it. So we're very fortunate that we see that benefit. But in future, we might well see that investment. We're expecting, I think when we've budgeted for next year, we're not expecting that. We're not budgeting at the rate that we've received this year. But from an interest on capital financing cost perspective, new loans we've budgeted to come in at a higher interest rate, so they'll cost us more, but those existing loans we hold will stay at the 3-ish% mark.
So effectively the 181,000 is a return into reserves rather than ongoing because it's a bonus?
Likely, yes, yeah.
Thank you. Robert, I think you were next.
Yes, thank you. I was just going to ask if you think our investment income and our investments in general will be affected in any way by the recent turmoil in the global investment market. I mean, hopefully we're not really exposed to that too much, but do you think that's the case?
I think there's always a possibility, because Bristol City Council invests a lot of it on our behalf, and it's part of the SLA we have with them in terms of the financial services contract. I don't know off the top of my head the specific investments that they use for our bank accounts, but they do only use kind of really short-term overnight kind of investments, so that our account is always available to us. We are looking at getting Treasury Management advisors, so Bristol City Council aren't advisors to us at the moment, but because we've got lots of Treasury Management activity upcoming in future to fund the capital programme and borrowing is expected to increase, we are looking at appointing advisors, and at that point I'd probably be able to give you a little bit better answer because we'd have a little bit more advice in that kind of area.
Thank you. Robin?
Supplementary to that, with are we having any conversations with the pensions people, because that's where a lot of the loss is happening and has happened over the last month or so. So presumably there's going to be a shortfall in the income expenditure there. Are we having early conversations?
None at the moment that I'm aware of, but I don't deal with the pensions directly. They sit under kind of People Services Directorate. Having said that, I know that they do triennial valuations of the pension scheme, and we have had there's often an undervaluation on those schemes, and we have to top up to prevent or protect us from future increases in employer contributions, and we're doing that over a 3-year period. At the moment, it's around £360,000 over each year for 3 years that we're having to contribute into the LGPS scheme. Firefighter pension scheme is slightly different because it's unfunded, in that we collect the contributions and then we pay them out again, and then any difference between the two is topped up by the Home Office. So we have a pension top-up grant to kind of hold our pension fund account neutral, so that our income and expenditure on that account is zero. So it would be on the LGPS scheme that I would imagine we'd see more of an impact from that. And I think there's an evaluation due on the LGPS scheme in the next year or so, because I think we're in the final year now of the last top-up, so it might be that we have another 3-year top-up that we have to do to prevent ourselves, protect ourselves from future increases in contribution rates.
Thank you, Verity. Any other questions? Okay, well, the recommendation is that we're asked to review the actual spend and a full-year forecast spending position against the 24-25 revenue budget. And I think with the questions, we've done that now. So we'll move on to agenda item 9, which is the 2024-25 capital programme update as at 28th February 2025 to include a quarterly update on prudential and treasury management indicators. And I think that's the longest title ever for an agenda item. But I'll pass back to you, Verity.
Thank you. Sorry, it is a mouthful. It's because we've incorporated a few other bits into this paper in the last year. So similarly to the revenue paper that I've just presented, this is a regular paper that we bring to this committee to give you an update on our capital position. This paper gives you an update based on the first 11 months of the year as actuals, and then a view of what our outcome will be for the full year based on 1 month of forecast as well. Similarly, we'll present the full year position at the AGM. So this is the last time you'll see this update for 24-25 at this committee. So there are 2 appendices to this paper. Appendix 1 on page 43, which is the the current capital position for the year. Apologies, when I've looked at this, I obviously didn't format it very well. So on mine, it's going across 2 pages. So it might be the same for yours. It's not necessarily the nicest formatting. And Appendix 2 is the summary balance sheet, which is on page 45. And again, similarly, I didn't do the best formatting on this one, so it's across 2 pages. I will take a similar approach as my previous paper, and I'll just pick out kind of key points from my paper. So I'll move on to page 38 and the financial implications, paragraph 4.1 at the top of page 38. Just to really pick out that as I go through, I'll talk a lot about kind of what we think the outturn for the year is going to be, and you'll see that lots of those outturns are expected to be lower than the budget, but this is just to really highlight that that is due to reprofiling of spend. So it's not underspends against the overall programme. We're not expecting the programme, or it's not because projects are not happening anymore or anything like that. It's just to do with timing of spend. So it's just to do with when that spend is being incurred and it's being pushed to later years rather than being removed from the programme. So I'll move on to section 5 and just pick out the key points. So premises, this is our largest, or one of our, it's our most significant area of capital spend. For 24-25, we've spent just over £1 million up to the end of February. The majority of that spend is in relation to the completion of the Bedminster project. There's just under £100,000 of spend on the start of the bath rebuild project, and then there's smaller works and kind of general improvements across the estate and the on-call stations of around £200,000, making up that actual spend. The full year outturn expected to be just under 1.5 million, so there are some commitments which are basically open orders for works that are going to be completed. We're expecting to spend a little bit more before the end of the year, but there is a chunky rephase of around 1.3 million into 25-26, and paragraph 5.2 really highlights that. So it's made up of two main parts. The bath rebuild project, we originally expected to spend £800,000 on that for 24-25. That's been reduced quite significantly, so there's £550,000 rephase into next year, or into 25-26. And similarly, we had a budget of around 1.2 million for really on-call station improvements, and a lot of that work has been rephased into 25-26 as well. So there's an £800,000 rephase there. That position is similar to the position that was presented to this committee at the last meeting in January. So just it's no significant change, just delays in terms of work being completed and the timing of that. Moving on to the bottom of page 38, in the fleet capital programme, we've spent around £200,000 so far this year, so up to the end of February. £150,000 of that is the first milestone on the major rescue tender purchase. There is a commitment of around £500,000 for the remaining milestones for that project, but none of those milestones are expected to be completed before the end of 24-25, so all of that £500,000 is expected to happen in later years now in 25-26, so that's been rephased into the later capital programme. Paragraph 5.5 just talks about the hovercraft replacement. So we've made a 50% payment, which is just over £40,000, for the first instalment payment of the new hovercraft. The remaining 50% will be paid on delivery, which is expected to be in May, so post March 25 year end. And then there's an associated vehicle to be purchased along with that. Total budget allocated was £250,000 for the two, so both the hovercraft and the vehicle. So we're rephasing just over £200,000 into the future 25-26 year of the capital programme to cover both of those costs. Paragraph 5.6 just talks about the overall rephase on the programme. So as I've already mentioned, we've got £500,000 on the major rescue tender and £200,000 on the hovercraft there. But we also expected to spend some money on the Type B appliances. We had £400,000 allocated in the programme this year. That's been delayed as a result of the fleet replacement strategy review. So that review's taken place, and really we're just trying to make sure that we spend the right money at the right time on the right appliance. So that money has been rephased into future years to make sure that we're spending on the most suitable replacement assets for our fleet area. Moving on to control. So within control, I think this is quite a similar position to the position that was presented previously to this committee as well. So we've spent £470,000 year to date, and paragraph 5.7 just outlines the three main things that we've spent that on. There's £11,000 of commitments in relation to one of those projects, which is the Cisco switches, which is expected to still be spent. But what we have done is rephased around £230,000 of the control budget into future years, and that's mainly in relation to the ISDN-P TSN work, which is to do with the 999 lines, and we have allocated that in the 25-26 capital programme, so that's been moved into later years. The final element of the capital programme is the other spend, so within that there's IT and operational equipment, and really the main thing to mention there is the IT rephasing. There's £260,000 that we think that was not going to be spent in 24-25, but it's been rephased into 25-26. Because of the new IT strategy and the appointment of the new head of IT, and really it's to rectify kind of historic underinvestment in that area, but making sure again that we spend it on the right things. So what we kind of needed that strategy in place first before decisions were made on what that budget was going to be allocated to. I think that's all I was going to say on the overall capital programme position. So we are expected to spend around £2.4 million for the full year. Previously, the out-term position that was presented to this committee was just under 2.7 million, so it's reduced slightly compared to last time, which is kind of in line with expectations as projects take longer to get off the ground. I will move on to the balance sheet reporting section of this paper now, it's on page 40. There's just a few paragraphs there. This is I've brought the balance sheet update to this committee now several times, but it's something that we brought in for this financial year, just to be in line with SIP for best practice. So that kind of scrutiny over the balance sheet, and in particular the material and or risky elements of the balance sheet, is considered best practice. So it's something that we've started to do both here and within the service leadership team and service leadership board. So the summary balance sheet is presented in Appendix 2. I won't go into any detail really in terms of the balances that are presented there. They aren't changing significantly. There's lots of them that aren't changing significantly month on month. But what I'm doing really is preparing for next year when we're expecting borrowing to increase significantly. So we've got £7 million of borrowing at the moment. As we go to fund our capital programme in future, we're going to have to be taking on new borrowing, and it's that line that will tie into our treasury management activities as well. So it's important that we kind of bring that to your attention as those numbers change. So it's not really significant change for now, but going into next year, I'm expecting to see some more significant movements on some of those balances. And then the final section of my report is on the treasury management indicators, which starts at the bottom of page 40. Again, this is something that we've begun to bring to this committee during the 24-25 financial year. And again, it's in line with SIP for best practice. And paragraph 5.15 just mentions there that it's my responsibility as Chief Finance Officer to make sure we have procedures to monitor and report performance against all of our forward-looking indicators. And it just recommends that you look at incorporating them within our revenue and capital reporting, which is what we've done. So we're bringing it to you in this paper here today. The indicators are allowed to be revised at any time. So what we do is have a look at the indicators on a quarterly basis and see whether we think there are expected to be any breaches, or whether we think there's any revisions that are required as a result of a change in profiling of spend or borrowing plans and things like that. Paragraph 5.18 on page 41 just outlines here that we're not presenting any updated indicators for you today, mainly because, as I mentioned when we talked through the capital programme earlier in this paper, the expected outturn for this year is 2.4 million. Previously presented was 2.675 million. So we've seen a reduction in the outturn. We're not bringing, so we're pushing spend to the right rather than bringing it forward. And it means that our borrowing requirement is shifting to the right as well. So the previously reviewed indicators were presented to you and there were no expected breaches. And because we're pushing spend to the right and we're not bringing any borrowing forward, there's going to be no we're in the same position really where there's going to be no breaches. So I haven't represented any updated indicators for you today on that basis, but paragraph 5.18 explains that. And then the final paragraph in section 5.19 just explains that a full kind of annual report on our treasury management performance will come to the AGM. It'll be the first time that we present a paper in that format, and again we're bringing that to the authority as part of aligning with SIP for best practice, that they recommend you have a half-year report, which we did earlier in the year, a full-year report, and then you have your quarterly reports in between. So there will be a full report on our treasury management performance at the end of the year, and that will include a full review of our indicators, again, for you to see that there have been no breaches and how they compare to how we originally set them. And then I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Richard.
Thank you again for a typically comprehensive report. Can I just focus for a moment on 5.5, the new hovercraft? The report says it's due to be delivered by the end of May this year. Am I correct? Has there been some slippage? Has it moved backwards? And secondly, the delivery vehicle won't be available till later in the financial year. Does that mean that we won't be able to deploy it? Will there be some interim arrangement?
I'm going to answer to the best of my ability based on the information I've had from the fleet manager. Yes, there has been some slippage. I think originally we expected delivery to be before the end of March. So that second milestone, that second 50% and that delivery date has slipped. My understanding is that we can use the old vehicle to deploy the new hovercraft. So we'll do that temporarily until the new one's available. And I think we're able to do that, but the old vehicle is quite old and I'm led to believe in not particularly good condition. So we will just do that temporarily until the new one's available.
Thank you. And I also noticed the cost of the hovercraft is 86,000 and yet the cost of the vehicle to deliver it is twice as much.
Is, and that when the business case came to SLB, there was significant discussion around that and the different options that we had available to us. But that is just the only options that we had. That's the way it works. So yeah, you're right. The vehicle is significantly more expensive than the actual hovercraft.
Thank you, Robin.
And I guess if you put wheels on a hovercraft, it's no longer a hovercraft. Can I just quickly pick up on 5.3 and fleet? And it's referencing back to the discussion we had a couple of months ago about vehicles going in and out of Bath and the clean air zone and the toing and froing about quite high cost vehicles which are due to be replaced but which will be exempted for the next couple of years, I believe. I don't see any reference to that within this section. Is that because those costs are already budgeted for? Because I understood as part of the discussions that we were actually bringing replacement forward rather than it being delayed. And because what I don't want to see is the same argument in a year or 18 months' time about when you haven't replaced non-compliant vehicles. And I understand they were extremely expensive ones.
I'd have to take away and have a look at the detail on that one because I don't know off the top of my head. But I think with all fleet replacements, they have quite significant lead times. So although they might have made a decision potentially to replace sooner, it might just be that the lead times mean that we're not seeing spend this year. It might be that it's brought forward from 26, 27 into 25, 26, for example. So it might be that we see that next year in terms of costs coming through. In terms of replacement costs, we worked with the fleet manager to put those replacement costs within the programme. If they've changed since then, we might well see variances if it's going to cost us more to replace vehicles than we thought. There is some investigation around whether we can replace vehicles not necessarily like for like. So we might make savings on some vehicles and potentially some might be more expensive because of clean air zone requirements and things like that. But it's something I'd have to take away to kind of get you a more full answer, if that's okay.
If that's fine, it's probably going to be more Amanda, I think, than yourself.
Well,
I think I'm not up to date on where that conversation went at Bath about the clean air zone and our appliances. So if you wouldn't mind dropping me an email about where we are and your question, then I'll make sure we answer that. And we can then publish that on our website. It's not a problem.
Fine. Okay. It would be politically, with a small p, useful, I think, to have some referencing in our papers. So if there's just any discussion comes up in Baines or the press, then it's, as agreed, we're planned, this is going to be reintroduced. And just a comment, I guess, on the 518 and the Prudential Treasury Management. I mean, yes, I understand that if you're underspending, then don't change those parameters. Isn't there a however at the end of that paragraph because of predicted interest rate rises? Or isn't that something that you do at this point?
You're right around predicted interest rate rises, but because we're not expecting to take on any borrowing this year, it just wouldn't affect the indicators for this year. And this kind of review is only looking at 24-25, but future indicators, you're right. When we have come to set the indicators that have been approved as part of the 25-26 budget, we've incorporated a higher interest rate within that. But if interest rates don't track as we're expected and we're taking on borrowing, that's when, even if our spending profile isn't changing, we would still need to look at them because our borrowing decisions might be different. If that makes sense. Yeah.
It's good to see good news, but I tend to be a bit of a joke when it comes to the bad news on the horizon.
Thank you, Robin. Robert.
Yeah, I don't know, but it seems to me that every year the majority of the capital programme seems to slip into future years. So is it fair to conclude from that the approved capital programme is unrealistic in the first place?
I think it's a fair challenge. It is something that's common in capital programmes for things to slip. And you're right, we have reported slippages in recent years. In terms of the capital programme that's set, the heads of departments, so our head of premises, our head of fleet, set those budgets and those targets based on what they think is achievable. So I would have to go back to them to get whether we think it's realistic or not. We do make some challenges in finance around that, particularly around milestone payments and things. So if we're assuming that a whole project is going to happen in 1 year when we think that's, we do make some challenges, but I guess from a finance perspective, we're not necessarily the experts in terms of how long those projects are going to take and when those milestones are coming in. So we have to rely on the information we get from those budget holders.
I think it may be what Tom's going to say this, but there have been political and international events that I think have impacted some prices and some delays. So, the war in Ukraine is a prime example. So there have been things that haven't been foreseen, I think, in some of the capital programme setting. But you're absolutely right, things do slip. So.
That wasn't what I was going to say. So, that's a good point, though. I think what I'm interested in is whether enough contingency is being left in. I see this on my own council as well. Like, we're going to spend all this money, and then we've got to raise all these capital receipts on the council for X, Y, Z spend. And then we come in several tens of millions of pounds underspent. Every other council, Eddie will well know, at the Bristol Council on this. So I'm just curious as to whether it comes back to that realism point, but is contingency being left in? Because if you're assuming that your Gantt chart's going to go absolutely swimmingly, everything's going to happen exactly, and then budget on that basis, then I just wonder whether we need to be a bit more realistic. But then the flip side of that, of course, is if things do slip, it probably helps our budgets as well, doesn't it? Sometimes in terms of just giving us a bit more headroom to manoeuvre within.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There are probably elements of contingency earlier on in the year. As we get to this point in the year where we're doing 11 months of actuals and 1 month of forecast, we've kind of dropped a lot of that. We might get this done because being realistic, it's not going to happen. I mean, the end. Obviously, the year has ended now, but at the time that we were preparing this paper, we were very close to the end of the year. So we did have to take a more realistic view. So some of those, like IT, for example, there was not really any chance that anything more was going to be spent this year. I think going back to the original point as well, another reason for some of those delays is because we've had a new fleet replacement strategy and new IT strategy. So there have been kind of pauses on spend to make sure that we're aligning with those new strategies. So it's something that happens, but I think you're right that we have to make sure we take a realistic view, but any underspends do benefit us from the perspective of delaying borrowing means less interest costs, benefits our revenue budget. So we need to kind of make sure we take a holistic view around the impact of all of that as it progresses.
Thank you, Verity. Are there any other questions from members? No? Okay. So that report, thank you, Verity, was for scrutiny, but no votes. So we can move on to agenda item 10, which is productivity, efficiency and savings strategy 2025-2028, and Matt is presenting on this one.
Good morning, members. Paper 10 can be found on page 47 of your packs. I'll begin with the section 1, the summary of the paper and my briefing. Three key elements to discuss today and share, which is, first of all, updating members on progress made against the 7 saving options, totaling £500,000, which were presented to the Fire Authority on 14th of February. The paper also outlines the approach being taken to address the remaining £1.3 million worth of efficiency savings to balance the 2025-2026 budget, and also introduces the productivity, efficiency and savings strategy for 2025 to 2028. Move on to section 2, which are recommendations also on page 47. The committee is asked to A, scrutinise the progress made against the 7 savings options and ongoing work to address the £1.3 million deficit, and B, approve the introduction of the previously mentioned strategy. Just moving on to section 3, some background information. As part of the 2025-2026 revenue budget setting process, which was presented to the Fire Authority on the 14th of February, members were asked to consider 2 funding options. So option 1, which was an increase in council tax of £5, was approved, and at that time resulted in a total savings requirement for this financial year of £1.78 million. Forming the initial response to this requirement, the 7 options worth £500,000 worth of savings were presented, which left a further £1.28 million worth of savings at that time. However, a further update was provided to members at the Fire Authority on the 19th of March, which informed that this £1.28 million deficit had increased to £1.36 million. Okay, and that is for a variety of reasons, which Verity will describe in much greater detail than I, but around the planning assumptions, financial planning assumptions and the changes to those. But this highlights the continuing need for the service to engage with and develop further efficiencies and transformation opportunities. Moving on to section 4, financial implications, which is on page 48. The 7 saving options are listed there with the contribution for each towards the £500,000. I won't go through that in detail because we've seen that in previous papers and in detail at a previous member's briefing. Moving on to section 5, key considerations on page 49. So paragraphs 5.1 and 5.2 provide an update narrative on each of the 7 options. By way of summary, I can inform you that implementation of these options is progressing on track and as expected. Some of the initiatives are completed with the prescribed changes now in place, whilst those with longer delivery times are progressing positively, with some nearing completion, although option F has a slightly longer time scale, as this is due to be completed in Q3 of this year. Of course, we had a briefing on last Friday on option G relating to the grey book post reductions, which were discussed in further detail. Paragraphs 5.3 and 5.4 relate to the ongoing work to address the remaining 1.3 million deficit we have for this year. So service leaders, which include the Service Leadership Board, Service Leadership Team and the Efficiency and Savings Programme Team, are continuing to review areas of expenditure to identify further cost-saving opportunities to address this remaining deficit. I can share with you that so far we're looking at all areas of the organisation, and we've identified some savings from non-pay budgets. So our non-pay related costs within our revenue budget total approximately £14 million. This could be typically supplies and services costs, or transport costs, and we've identified approximately £600,000 worth of savings for this year from those budgets. Okay, leaving just over £700,000 worth of savings to be identified. This is being progressed through a mixture of business change, people change and structural change options, as well as the potential use of reserves. That is being discussed and decided on currently. So I think it's important for members to be aware that the proposals for addressing this remaining deficit will be shared with you at the Fire Authority meeting on the 2nd of July, I think it's scheduled for. So those plans are being put in place at the moment, and it will come to you formally on the 2nd of July. Okay. I think it's just worth highlighting the ongoing efficiency and savings pressures across the medium-term financial plan. So just by way of reminder, for 2026-2027, is likely to be approximately 2 million, we're assuming at the moment. And then the following year, 1.7 million. And then in 2028-2029, approximately £500,000. So I think that the point I want to make here is, whilst we've recently made some challenging decisions, and we'll be making more challenging decisions in the coming months, this is here for the medium to long term, which hence why in a moment I'll reference a strategy. So that process is embedded into our organisation for the long term to support our work in that area. Okay. So moving on to paragraphs 5.5 to 5.8, they introduce the productivity, efficiency and savings strategy for 2025 to 2028. The actual strategy itself can be found within Appendix 1, which is in page 55 of your packs. This is a new strategy for the service and not one that's been updated. And it sets out to, as I just mentioned, provide the service's long-term approach to delivering best value through optimising our resources, enhancing productivity and sustained operational efficiency. It reflects our ongoing commitment to closing that funding gap, and it also aligns with key national expectations such as our statutory duty, best value under the Local Government Act 1999 and HMIC FRS Efficiency Inspection Framework. To support the delivery of the strategy, underneath it will sit a productivity and efficiency plan. So this plan will serve as the operational delivery mechanism for that strategy, and it is a plan which will be updated annually to reflect the evolving financial position we find ourselves in. We mentioned earlier that due to our financial planning being based on lots of assumptions, that can change. So it will be an annually refreshed plan to address the climate we find ourselves within as we move through the medium-term financial plan. And it also adheres to the requirement within the Fire and Rescue National Framework for England, which states that fire and rescue authorities are required to produce efficiency plans, along with the Home Office requirement for such a plan, which they share with us annually and is quite prescriptive in the content and detail they require. Section 6, risks, Section 7 and Section 8, I won't detail, so that concludes the end of my presentation of the report. I'll hand over back to the Chair for questions.
Thank you, Matt. Richard.
My initial questions are purely general, actually. Matt mentioned this is clearly a work in progress, a challenging major piece of work, of course. Matt mentioned the 2nd of July AGM. The last thing I saw was an email from Amanda giving a number of options. Do we know whether it will actually happen then?
Thank you for the question. Yes, so I got several responses, and every date that was proposed caused a problem. I've had to go back to the drawing board. I'm going to a board meeting tomorrow and hoping to identify another date. It's subject to officers being available, and there is a commitment in the diary. It might be Monday the 30th of June, but I don't know yet. So I'm hoping that might work for members. The problem we've got is because it's been in the diary for so long, the 2nd of July, I have staff on leave over the key period for producing reports, publishing reports, setting up the meeting. So I can't, postponing it a bit later doesn't really work. So
whilst I would keep you to this,
yes.
if it's on the 20th of June,
30th.
is likely...
30th,
sorry.
Yeah.
Is likely to be a morning or afternoon?
I don't know. That's the problem, because we have a commitment that might need to be moved. So I don't know until tomorrow. I'm sorry to be a pain. Is there a problem already with that date?
Well, I personally prefer the afternoon.
Okay.
But I'm only one person.
Okay.
My second query, clearly, the options Matt brings are going to be quite sizable, of course, and potentially controversial. So I would hope at least one, possibly even two members' remote meetings could be held before.
Absolutely. We're waiting for, obviously, we are having conversations about that already. We've got the new chief starting on the 12th of May, and he's obviously going to be leading that member engagement. So we can't really go firm on those details as yet until he arrives. But yes, absolutely right. I think it would be helpful to have a couple of member touch points. So additional member briefing dates are going to appear in your diaries. I appreciate it's just fitting it all in, and you are all very busy. But you're absolutely right, Richard. That's a very good comment that we do need to do that. Okay.
Thanks, Richard. Tom.
Yeah, I was going to touch on member engagement, but also what engagement have you got planned with the FBU as well over these proposals? Because obviously it's obviously quite important that there's engagement there too.
So, the principal officers are in regular engagement with the FBU on the progress with efficiency and savings. I don't personally sit within those discussions. I'm absolutely assured that ongoing engagement is a priority for the principal officers, so that is taken care of, and there's a healthy relationship there in engaging on plans. I just touch back on maybe what Mr. Eddy mentioned a few moments ago around the size of the savings that we still need to achieve over the rest of the MTFP. So we're talking here today of this financial year being around about 1.8 million. It extends up to 5 million in total. And then, of course, we have, as we progress through this year, then the following year's budget comes into view, doesn't it, within the MTFP, and we don't know what that holds. So I think what I want to say here is within the paper it mentions 3 types of options. We've got business options, people options, and structural change options. Structural change options, I would suggest, are the most challenging for the organisation and for the authority, because they are looking at, for example, our premises, our appliances, the disposition, how many of each we have, and shift systems, etc. Our staff work. So changes to them are inherently challenging. Option G references a reduction of 4 grade-up posts, which we decided on back on 14th of February. That was challenging, very challenging. I'm not making any predictions of the future, but we may be visiting similar decisions in the near future, of which, of course, engagement with the FBU, and not just the FBU, other key stakeholders, and of course our staff, and supporting them through the changes and engagement with them, because, as my colleague to my right mentioned earlier around our cultural journey at the moment, we have to keep that in mind, because some of these decisions and options are very challenging from a cultural point of view as well. So that engagement across the board is key. I'd like to say also that the efficiency savings programme is approximately just over a year old now, and the strategy which I've shared with you today is one of the themes embedded within it is continuous improvement. And we've reflected on the past year on the programme, and there are, of course, areas for improvement, and the plan, which I mentioned, supports that strategy, we'll look to make decisions for savings earlier on in the year. Because one of the areas we can improve, it gives us more time for consultation, discussion and engagement with stakeholders, which has been a bit of a challenge within the previous year due to the timescale we gave ourselves.
Do you want to give us a flavour of what's potentially coming?
I can't give you a flavour right now because the decisions haven't been made, but I can share with you, for example, if I was to reference those structural change options, some risk modelling is underway at the moment. Okay, what is risk modelling? It's software which looks at our previous 5 years of emergency response, and within that software program, you can change, if you like, our the location of our fire appliances, move them, alter the amount we have, and that will then show you with the best degree of accuracy that data can provide what the effect of that will be on your response times, for example. So then that gives you some information to maybe base some decisions on of moving your assets or changing your assets and still providing an operational response model which is fit for the risk profile of our community. Of course, if, for example, that was to remove an appliance, and I'm not saying that is, but that is, of course, an option, that becomes a very challenging initiative to instigate.
Well, I guess we'll see more detail at the briefs. I'd encourage those briefings to be as early as possible to help facilitate the smooth running of the AGM.
Paula wanted to add something.
Yes, thank you. It's really just to cover what Group Manager Osborne has said. We have got some sort of research and analysis being undertaken. So in regards to the engagement, myself and the other POs have regular contact with the Fire Brigade Union, and I know Corporate Services also speak with their unions as well. So we are engaging, and part of the strategy is to be open, transparent and honest, which is why we put the strategy in place to ensure that we plan in plenty of time, and we've got time for that consultation and engagement, which is why we will be bringing anything back to you. But it's just recognition we will have a new chief in place at that time. And so we don't want to disclose things now or make comments on things that may change by then. So we'd rather just take that time and get things right. Okay.
Absolutely. So just a final comment for me. I think it's, approving the strategy now obviously doesn't necessarily mean the options that get brought forward get approved later. And I think I just want to make that point really clear, that sort of happy to approve the strategy, but just be aware what I won't do is tie my hands now for some things that I might decide not a good idea later. So I just want to say that's what it said.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's purposely why the strategy is more overarching principles, and the plan will be the plan, which will be the detailed actions, and it will go down to more granular detail within the plans, within the efficiencies and savings programme of work. But the programme is more about, the strategy is more about our principles that underpin that.
Thank you, Paula. Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Matt, on 5.2G, I'm aware the update last week wasn't public and not all members were possibly able to attend, so could we fully describe the kind of method of the implication now at all?
I've shared the presentation today with Emma Bowen, or share the presentation with you. But the briefing was around showing the reduction of 4 doesn't affect the operational response area of the organisation. So in brief, we have 398 firefighters on our 10 whole-time fire stations. So that 4 post-reduction isn't coming from that part of the organisation. It's coming from service delivery support. So examples of that may be, for example, a training department, for example, is within that part of the organisation. So around the reason for that briefing last week came from Mr. Goggin at a previous meeting around providing assurance that we weren't affecting the operational response, the emergency response, and our ability to provide firefighters on our appliances are having a negative effect on our response times. So that, the four are from a different part of the organisation.
Just to fully clarify, are those would those reductions be kind of voluntary redundancies, or would they be not replacing people on retirement, or do we know that stage as yet, or not?
It's not voluntary redundancy. It's as people leave the organisation. Statutory Finance Officer mentioned earlier that we're understaffed a little at the moment within our grey book establishment, so it comes from that.
Paula, did you want to?
Thank you. If there was, I don't want to jump in if there's any more questions, but it was really just to say thank you to Group Manager Osborne. I don't want to embarrass him, but he's been successful in our area manager process and will be moving on. But I hope you will see as members the significant progress we've made in the efficiencies and savings programme of work. And this is largely down to Matt and his leadership within the team. So just want to put on record, thank you for your work within the programme, Matt.
Thank you, Paula, and we all echo that as well. So well done, Matt. Are there any other questions? No? Okay. So the recommendations are, I've fallen off the table, but never mind. We are asked to scrutinise the progress made against the 7 agreed savings options and the ongoing work to address the remaining £1.3 million deficit. And we are asked to approve the introduction of the PES strategy 25-28 and its alignment with national directives and service priorities. So I'd like to propose that we do approve that. Do I have a seconder? Dan, thank you. Are there any votes against? Any abstentions? And all those in favour? Thank you. So that is approved. Thank you very much, Matt. We'll move on to approval of Protection Strategy 2024 to 2028, and Steve's going to present on this one.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon now, members. You'll be pleased to know this is not going to mention anything to do with finance, nothing about efficiencies and savings, and nothing about any cuts or potential. This is all positive in our protection strategy. So yes, good afternoon. I'm currently responsible for prevention and protection. You have before you, starting in your packs on page 75, my brief paper which introduces the protection strategy for the service. The date of the strategy you'll see, and I'll address this one straight away, is 24 to 28. Firstly, that's partly because how long it's taken, unfortunately, to get the strategy to you in this room. But the key point for me is a large piece of the work that's within the strategy linked to our service plan that started in 24 to 25 and obviously to 28. And I wanted to keep the date as 24 to 28, partly because the HMI are coming back, and there's some fantastic results that work we've already done within that particular strategy that I didn't want to go unnoticed and suddenly be lost through closing down the previous service plan and the like. So hence, some of the work's already done in the previous financial year, and I felt it was appropriate that as the strategy linked to that, the strategy kept that date of 24 to 28. Obviously, it's a fluid document, so if we were suddenly to receive something left field, then obviously, like with any of our strategies and our policies, they can be amended. But it was to keep it at the 24 to 28. So the history of the strategy, it's the first standalone strategy for protection. His Majesty's Inspectorate, when they visited last in 2022, made a comment within the narrative that it wasn't a protection strategy. They asked for a prevention strategy, but they didn't ask for a protection strategy. So we felt very prudent and that we ought to, whilst they haven't asked for it, they've mentioned we didn't have one, so let's get one. And my colleague here on the right as well with his response strategy. But it was a really interesting piece of work to do. What you'll see from the strategy that you have in your packs, it identifies 6 key areas of our work across protection that link to our statutory duties. Those 6 areas being building regs and licensing, fire safety audits of our commercial premises, fire investigation, our operational fire safety checks, and unwanted fire signals. They are six key areas that the HMI will measure us against as part of any inspection. And they are the key areas that make up the work around our Community Risk Management Plan, our CRMP, obviously our statutory duties under the Fire and Rescue Services Act, those that have had the unfortunate experience of myself talking about protection before and the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, and obviously the National Framework Document. So this strategy underpins those areas, and you'll notice from the strategy they are statements of intent. The reason they're statements of intent is because very much the granular detail that sits behind that already form actions within our service plan. And you'll know from reading our service plan, we have a number of actions in there across all of prevention and protection, and they're the areas where we provide that assurance that we carried out that work. So what I was very mindful of not doing is having more actions in a strategy, when a strategy should be more around a higher, longer-term vision as opposed to more granular detail. So in short, there are no financial implications associated with this strategy. We are very fortunate that through some prudent financial planning by Claire and Verity, we have a baseline budget which funds our protection staff. We have over the last few years seen us almost doubled our protection department post Grenfell, and we are in receipt of a protection uplift grant from the government, which we've had now for about 4 years. I wasn't going to mention finance, so I apologise. However, that grant is half at the moment this year. However, we do have a rolling underspend of that grant, which provides some assurance to members that actually we are receiving this support before these posts have to be baseline funded, probably for another 2 years, which is very good. And then beyond that, they form part of our longer-term financial planning, and those are baseline funding posts. So we've seen a significant increase in our department over the last couple of years, and members, again, that have had briefings from me previously will understand the reasons why. So there are no risks associated with this strategy. The risks are that linked to our work under our statutory duties are covered anyway and day-to-day business via our corporate risk register CRO2, and again SLT, SLB and members will be able to scrutinise that as part of our duties. So for me it's very short of me. I'll stop talking, which again those that know me will know that's a joy, and I'll open the floor to any questions, because I could talk about protection all day long. So I'll hand back over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. With the protection uplift disappearing in 2 years, how is that going to affect us?
Well, hopefully it won't disappear. At the moment, it's been reduced to 50%. What we have done with the money that we've not spent on it so far, and the money we're due to get this year, that will give us another 2 years. Like everything, we're uncertain of what the future of that grant looks like. It's currently a standalone grant because it's ring-fenced purely for protection. And the Home Office are very much, they want to see the added value of this protection, because they've invested heavily post-Grenfell. It may be that in future that grant becomes part of just a wider grant, very similar to we have for our Hicksgate, for instance, the grant that funds Hicksgate, and our urban search and rescue. So it may be the same. But we're in a fortunate position that, again, because we've made some structural changes to the team over the years by reducing some grey book roles to green book roles, beyond that 2 years, if that grant was to no longer exist, then we will not see any reduction in our staff. We've been able to, so we're getting a bit of we're utilising that money to help pay for those posts before having to take on that baseline funding ourselves.
Thank you very much. Richard.
Again, can I thank you and your team for the work you've done. Looking at the attached paper, I wonder whether the section headed building regulations on page 87 or 9 could more appropriately be rebadged as upholding building regulations and influencing planning consents, because it does seem to be a bit just aimed at the building control. And certainly as someone who takes a strong view and involvement in Bristol's DC system, planning system, Avon Fire has taken a fairly robust approach to certainly the major developments locally.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Eddy. It's named that way purely and simply because the statutory duty for protection is just on building regulations. But you're absolutely right. As a service, through planning, we get much more heavily involved, which almost sits outside of protection. I don't have a statutory duty under planning, but I do under building regulations. And certainly Councillor Reynard will know from our dealings through our high-risk residential buildings currently, and the work potentially that will implicate across the service area for the West of England Combined Authority remediation product. We will be heavily involved in that as we move forward with building regulations and the building safety regulator. But certainly planning is something that we've just recently upped our game actually in relation to planning, and certainly around how we respond to those and how we engage in those short-term planning applications, but certainly the longer-term planning applications. And absolutely, the change in legislation is massively helping us as a service have more teeth, I suppose, when it comes to those planning applications and the implications for members of the public and sometimes the most vulnerable.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, there's a slight typo on the recommendations. Committee is asked to approve the protection strategy, and it says 2024-25, but it is actually 2024 to 2028 for publication. So I'd like to propose that we do so. Can I have a seconder? Richard, thank you.
Could I apologise? I need to leave for my next meeting now.
No problems. Thank you, Richard. Okay, do we have any votes against? Any abstentions? And votes in favour? Brilliant, thank you. I just managed to get that one in before you left, Richard. It's brilliant. Okay, moving on now to our response strategy and the approval of the response strategy 25-28. And Vaughan has magically appeared in the room from another meeting next door, so I'll leave him to present.
Thank you, Chair. Afternoon, members, colleagues. As I say, apologies for not being here all day. I'm on a training event next door, and as soon as I finish this, I'll be going back to that training event. So a little bit like Mr. Ben today. So for those of us who can remember him. In summary, as Steve has mentioned, during the previous HMIC inspection, it was identified that we didn't have a response strategy. The reason we didn't have a response or a protection strategy previously was that in a number of HMI inspections previously, it was determined we didn't need or want, or the HMI didn't want us to have those strategies. They preferred a large overarching document, which, as I'm sure members will recall from a number of years ago, became far too unwieldy, and then they've changed their tact, and this is why this strategy's been written. Obviously, I subsequently wrote it to reflect that, but it also reflects the timeframes of the overarching service plan, but also complements the service plan, and everything that's mentioned in the response plan links back to the service plan. So we've got that thread running through to ensure that we meet our statutory responsibilities. It's from 25 to 28, mainly because I didn't finish writing it until 25 to 28. I waited until Steve had done his strategies in order that they could reflect each other and they look broadly similar, so there's a common theme to all our strategies across the organisation. As a background, where it was identified, it was identified by the HMIC that it was required, it was written, and if you look at the document that's been provided, it talks around our response and what our response function is. It isn't just about responding to fires and road traffic collisions. There's an awful lot more that we do, and obviously we're grateful to the funding we've received from the Fire Authority for both our statutory and our non-statutory duties. Talks around our stations. You know, a lot of people in our communities won't be aware of all of the stations we have and the areas we cover and the makeup of those stations, whether they're whole time and on call, or simply on call on their own. Identifies where our control room is situated. Obviously, people need to be aware of where the main control function is that services all our stations. Talks around our input into prevention and protection, because obviously this strategy complements Steve's protection and his prevention strategy, because as the owner of the bulk of the workforce, Response delivers a lot of our prevention and protection activities. Talks around performance and improvement, how we look to improve our performance both operationally, but also culturally, meeting with all the cultural needs of the organisation and how we intend to do that going forward and how that will work. And then finally, it mentions resilience. And you might think that resilience is about the resilience of the service we provide and the provision, but it's predominantly around the resilience of our staff, and obviously our staff's mental health considerations, the things that our staff are exposed to, and how we as an organisation look after them, ensure they're fit, ensure they have medicals, ensure they have access to relevant support facilities if they require them. Financially, there are no additional financial implications as a result of this strategy. There's already baseline budget finance for our personnel across the response function. We're obviously serviced by the capital strategy, the property strategy and the fleet replacement strategy to ensure we have all our equipment and buildings and kit for our appliances and our staff ready to go and ready to use. The key consideration is that this strategy is, as it says, will be delivered by the response function, so it will be delivered by our stations and our control staff to ensure we meet all our statutory obligations. There are no additional risks to this strategy being written, and any risks we have within ops, or response rather, are already captured within the corporate risk register. There are no legal or policy implications to this strategy, and there are no background papers other than the response strategy which is attached to your documents. And I appreciate how what a busy day you've got, so I'll stop talking there and answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Vaughan. As regards on the resilience side of things, it's something I have a personal interest in, and I was availed of, I think it was the Red Poppy counselling, some years ago by the Fire Authority to help with my complex PTSD. Is that, I presume, is something that's available to all firefighters?
It's still available, but we don't use Red Poppy anymore. We use Workout Solutions, and there are other mechanisms. We have support personnel within the service who are specifically trained around trim, mental health awareness, and supporting their colleagues. And also we have if people rather do it confidentially, they don't need to go through HR or anyone or their line manager. They can go direct to Workout Solutions and receive the treatment from them.
Brilliant, because obviously men are quite notorious for keeping it all inside and you know, stiff upper lip and all that, and I imagine firefighters are no different, so it's nice to know that they can access that without anyone else knowing. Tom.
Yeah, I've just got 3 points. Start with the mental health side. It's really good to see that reflected in this strategy. I think, you know, it comes back to culture. A bit. It's about making sure that people feel they can speak out and speak up, you know, when they're struggling as well, and making sure that's an atmosphere that we are creating, that we challenge any sort of mental health stigma and discrimination that goes on in the workplace. The other 2 things I was just going to say, it's good to see making every contact count also reflected in here as well. You know, it's really important when we're dealing with vulnerable people that we're sort of utilising those touch points and make sure we're joining up with other services that might be supporting those individuals. And then finally, and this is me just absolutely nitpicking, but your map on page 6 is missing the logos for Southmead Fire Station. Sorry.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, no dramas. I'll speak to my tech guru and have it added.
Could let Emma have one of those to republish, that would be great.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Vaughan? No? Okay. So we are asked to approve the response strategy for publication, obviously once the logos have been added. So I'd like to propose that we do that. Do I have a seconder? Tom, thank you. Are there any votes against? Any abstentions? And votes in favour? Okay, thank you. That's carried. Thank you, Vaughan, and enjoy your training event. Okay, moving on to agenda item 13, which is agree or monitor the procurement forward plan, 250k to 1 million, snapshot date of 4th of April 25, and Tanya's going to present this one.
Hi, thank you, Chair. So this is the usual pipeline report that I provide to this meeting. It lists potential procurement activity that's either in progress or completed. Recently completed, I tend to take those off so you don't end up with a long list. And when they've been approved to proceed to procurement and whether they've been awarded or not. As this is quite a fluid document and sometimes things come on and off or they stay there for a little while strategies, etc. are discussed and decided upon. But yeah, usual information, and always happy to answer any questions, although there are rarely any.
Thank you, Tanya. Do we have any questions? Robin?
I had to take up that challenge. A slightly side question. What accounts do we, or what discussions have we had around the Keep It Local procurement strategy that's been taken on by a lot of public authorities, in part to make sure you're keeping money in the local community, but also I think there's a discussion about the size of procurement contracts so that smaller local organisations are more able to take on contracts rather than, as we're seeing in some of the NHS, multinational organisations with dedicated bidding teams being able to successful at procurement.
Yeah, so I think this is probably linked to a lot of the new Procurement Act that's recently been put in, and there's a real emphasis on keeping it Britain, not necessarily local, but Britain. But our own strategy is also to try and put as much through our SMEs in our own area as well. And there's also real emphasis on small, medium enterprises, SMEs, because there's different ways of interpreting SME. So yeah, again, that's something that we also focus on. I'm currently writing our new procurement strategy, so hopefully I can bring to this forum something a little bit more in depth about the types of things that we're looking at. But yeah, we look at each procurement exercise. We have a strategy. It's called a procurement sourcing plan, and we look at how we're going to do it, how we're going to bid, what kind of market research, who's available, whether we can break it up to be more attractive to smaller or local, all sorts of different things as part of that work before we go out to tender. No, not often, but I'll take you up on that.
Excellent. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Robin. Are there any other questions? Nope. Okay, well, that was for scrutiny only, so we've done that. Now, agenda item 14 is the date of our next meeting, which will be on Thursday, the 31st of July 2025 at 10:30 hours. Now, it says on the papers that the venue will be the main conference room, headquarters, Portishead. But I know that we are looking into moving the meetings around to make it fair for everyone travelling. Amanda, did you want to add anything?
It's a piece of work that's ongoing, and Emma and I are going to tackle a bit more of that tomorrow, so after board. So hopefully we'll have some news soon about new venues we've identified, because I'm just conscious that some members travel a lot further than others, and I just want to be fairer and move us around as much as we can. But also I've been challenged quite rightly about the ability to use public transport, so we're trying to find locations which are more accessible to public transport. It creates a challenge because we have carloads of kit we have to bring, and public transport's not often accompanied by lots of parking for people who have to bring all the stuff to set up the meeting. So it's a bit challenging, but we're getting there. So hopefully more news soon. Okay.
Thank you very much. So now we come to agenda item 15, which is the exclusion of the press and public. We are asked to resolve that the public be excluded from the meeting during the following items of business on the grounds that they contain exempt information pursuant to Schedule 12A, Part 1 of the Local Government Act 1972, and that in accordance with Schedule 12A, Part 2, Paragraph 10 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So I'd like to propose that we do go into an exempt session now. Can I have a seconder? Robert, thank you. Any votes against? Any abstentions? And votes in favour? Thank you. So we can now stop the recording.